Okay, welcome to today's video. This is Mr. M, and I hope you're taking notes in your journal. Today's topic is equivalent fractions. We're going to be talking about fractions that are equal to each other. But before we talk about that, we have to answer this question. What is a fraction? I think you might already know what a fraction is, but let's just make sure. Fractions. A fraction is a piece or a part of a whole. So my best example is if you have a pizza and you slice it up into 8 slices, you can count those slices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I gave you one of those slices, you would have 1/8 of the pizza. You would have one out of the 8 pieces that make up the whole pizza. So fractions are always some piece or some part of a greater whole. Here's another example. This could be another pie or pizza or whatever, but in this situation, of the 8 slices, 3 of the 8 are shaded. So that a fraction to represent this picture would be 3/8. This is probably nothing too tricky, but let's just make sure. Try this one on your own. If you need to pause the video for a second and count the squares, you can do that. Alright, there's a total of 16 squares, and 4 of them are shaded, so 4 of the 16 squares makes a fraction of 4/16. On this example, there are a total of 25 squares, and 15 of those 25 squares are shaded in green. So a good fraction for this picture would be 15/25, or 15 out of 25. Here's a more challenging one for you. Pause it if you need to. Count the blue shaded areas. Alright, if you count, there's 10 sections on this picture. 4 of them are pink, but I asked for blue. So a fraction for the blue sections would be 3/10, or 3 out of 10. Okay, basically fractions always represent a blank out of blank statement. Like 1/7 really means 1 out of 7, okay? Or 6/7 really means 6 out of 7. So 1/7 would be like, well, 1 out of every 7 days, once a week. 6/7 means 6 out of every 7 days, so 6 times a week. Okay, is 1/7 the same as 6/7? No. Are those equivalent fractions? No. Equivalent fractions are fractions that are the same. For instance, if we go back to our pizza idea, if you ate 4 of the 8 slices and you count out 4 of those 8 slices, you can visually see that 4 of the 8 slices would be half of a pizza, right? So 4/8 and 1/2 are equivalent fractions. They're fractions that are the same thing. Okay? You can tell mathematically that 4/8 and 1/2 are equivalent to each other because if you take the top, okay, we know they're equivalent because if you take the top and divide it by 4 and then do the same thing to the bottom, 4 divided by 4 is 1 and 8 divided by 4 is 2. So you can see that 4/8 equals 1/2. They're equivalent fractions, and you're actually allowed to divide the top and the bottom of a fraction by 4 as long as you do the same thing to the top and the bottom. So you could divide the top and the bottom by 2, or heck, you could even multiply the top and the bottom by 2, or by 10, or by 12, or by 1.38 if you wanted to, as long as you do the same thing to the top and the bottom. Okay, here's a different example. What if I wanted to find another equivalent fraction to 4/8? I could times the top by 4 and times the bottom by 4 as long as I do the same thing to both. If I did that, what would I get? Well, on top I would have 4 times 4, and on bottom I would have 8 times 4. That would be 16 32nds, or 16 over 32, or you could say 16 out of 32. But your fraction would be a 16 on top and a 32 on the bottom, and it would be an equivalent fraction to the 4/8 that you started with. Could you times the top by 100? Sure, as long as you times the bottom by 100 as well. What would you get? You'd get 400/800ths, and that would be another equivalent fraction to 4/8. And you could keep going and going. the number of equivalent fractions for 4/8 is endless because you could keep on doing stuff to the top and doing stuff to the bottom, and as long as what you do to the top is the same as what you do to the bottom, you're going to come out with an equivalent fraction. Here's an example for you to write down. Okay, how do I make an equivalent fraction for 2/7? I'm just going to pick something to do to the top. Let's say I double it. I multiply it by 2. Okay, can I double the bottom as well? Yep, and as long as I do it to both, we're going to get an equivalent fraction, and you should be able to see what that equivalent fraction it will be. It'll be 2 times 2 on the top, which is 4, and 7 times 2 on the bottom, which is 14. I think you're probably getting this by now, but let's try one more example. What if I take that 2/7 and I do an easier thing to it? This is my favorite way to make an equivalent fraction. I think it's the easiest. Let's multiply the top by 10 and multiply the bottom by 10. What makes this easy is that 2 times 10 is easy, it's 20. 7 times 10 is easy, it's 70. So 2/7 is the same as 20/70ths. And you could keep on multiplying by 10 and get 200 700ths or 2,000 7,000ths if you really wanted to as well. Here's your practice problem for the night. Try to come up with, well, let's have you try to come up with at least 2 other fractions that are equivalent to 3/5. Do that on your own, and we'll check our answers in class tomorrow. Hope you learned something. See you later.